Yes, I bought this shirt specifically for this video because if Young Justice is not going to get a season 5, then I am going to sit here and manifest a movie. Before you ask, yes, this is going to be every DC animated movie. And we're talking the DC Universe animated original line, the DC AMU, the Tomorrowverse, the Lego DC movies, DC Superhero Girls, Teen Titans, even the miniseries turned movies like Constantine, City of Demons, or Vixen. Everything is here. And while I'm aware that this is a gargantuan undertaking, it's also one that I've been wanting to do for a while. My credentials, if you are curious, include the fact that I have been mainlining DC animated movies since I discovered them in quarantine in 2020. I've seen most of the films on this list at least twice, some of them as many as like 5 or 6 times, and I love making lists. Obligatory acknowledgement that ranking is not always the best way to categorize the things that you like, and these are really just my opinions. We're not being objective here. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. This is just for fun. I do, however, have 2 disclaimers that I want to make right now. The first is that while I do consider myself very well versed in DC animation, I'm not as well versed in the comics as I would like to be. I have read the comics that some of these movies are based on, but most of them I haven't, so although I do plan on getting around to them eventually, I will be reviewing most of these movies just solely on their own merits. The other disclaimer is that I have had to make a couple of judgment calls on what to exclude for this video, mainly for the sake of, my own sanity. The first exclusions have to do with length, so I'm not including any short films, so no DC Showcase, no Fleischer cartoons or anything like that. I have also elected not to include any of, the DVD releases where they just took a bunch of episodes of an existing TV show and rolled them into a movie, such as Justice League Secret Origins, which is really just the first 3 episodes of Justice League the Animated Series. However, rest assured, I still watched a lot of the things that I chose to exclude just to make sure. I even rewatched all of the Fleischer cartoons just to see if it would make sense to include them as their own singular ranking, and I came away satisfied that that wouldn't make sense, but I tell you that just to impress upon you how thorough I have been in this project. If there was even the slightest argument for including something on this list, I watched it. The result is that over the last 3 to 4 months, I have either watched or rewatched 97 of these movies. I have just been binging DC animated movies day and night, so please appreciate the amount of work that I put into this. Without further ado, let's get into the ranking. Now, this is going to be a traditional ranking from 105 all the way to 1, but I have also taken the liberty of grouping them into distinct tiers, which I had a little bit of fun naming. So the first tier is titled In Blackest Night. These are the movies that I can honestly say I actively dislike, and listen, I love DC and I love DC animated movies, so it's really hard for me to actively dislike one of these movies. I did have an alternate title for this tier, which was Kalel, no! But if I'm being honest, I don't think any of these movies are as bad as that clip. So I am aware that there are far less technically proficient films on this list, but none that managed to elicit such an absence of feeling in me as the Batman Unlimited movies. For those unaware, this trio of movies was essentially created to sell the Batman Unlimited line of action figures, and they feel like that. They're empty and soulless, just like most corporate cash grabs tend to be. Animal Instinct in particular follows a group of animal-themed supervillains such as Cheetah, Killer Croc, Silverback, and Man-Bat, who team up with the Penguin, who despite his name is not an animal, to try to cause a gold-laced meteor to crash into Gotham and kill everyone, because they all kept calling the Penguin ugly. Now, if you're like me, you might have heard that description and thought, oh, animal-themed supervillains, where's Vixen, an animal-themed superhero? And she's not here. She was never going to be here because she didn't have an action figure that they were trying to sell. Because this movie really isn't interested in delving into concepts of animal instinct versus human nature or anything so deep. It's really just interested in taking the characters and putting them into different suits that they can then translate into action figure designs, because this whole movie really is one giant toy ad, which would be bad enough on its own, but this movie is also just not that enjoyable. The pacing drags, the plot is uninteresting, the characters are not fun, the dialogue is bad, the visuals are okay, and the action scenes are pretty good, which is why I say that this film is at least somewhat technically competent, but for me personally, I'm always going to reward messy creativity over empty, soulless proficiency. I watched all 3 Batman Unlimited movies in a day, and barely even felt like I'd watched a single film. So a little history lesson for those out of the know. In 2015, DC partnered with Shea Fontana to create a web series called DC Superhero Girls, which would run until 2018 when it was rebooted by Lauren Faust, creator of My Little Pony. The series is best described as high school AU fanfiction of the entire DC universe. Most of its heroes, as well as some of its villains, are reimagined as students at Superhero High, which is run by Principal Amanda Waller, voiced by Yvette Nicole Brown, and Vice Principal Gorilla Grodd. This is actually all quite fun if you're like me and charmed by the AO3 of it all. The LEGO versions, however, are headaches. Brain Drain in particular features a mind control / amnesia plot that might have been compelling if it weren't riddled with plot holes and if the voice performances were not a little bit insufferable. The movie has very talented and experienced voice actors, but it seems like they were all directed to be as strident and as overbearing as possible, probably to match this movie's sense of humor, which is just the worst kind of juvenile. The title is apt. I do feel like I lost brain cells watching this. Robin! So most of you are presumably familiar with the DC AMU, DC's off-the-books attempts to compete with the MCU. And while I do genuinely like a lot of the DC AMU movies, Son of Batman is unfortunately not one of them. And it's not for lack of trying, and it is definitely not for lack of love for Damian Wayne, because despite the fact that a lot of people really don't like him, I kind of adore the little psycho. This movie just fails to do anything interesting with its characters or generate an interesting plot, and I think what it comes down to is the lack of development for Bruce and Damian's relationship. There's no moments of them really building any form of connection or trust, so it doesn't even really make sense at the end of the movie that Damian would decide to stay with him. We also don't get to see any kind of reaction from Bruce to the revelation that he has a son, which would presumably change a lot about how he sees himself, but no, we don't get to see any of that kind of stuff. A couple months after watching this movie for the first time, I couldn't even remember who the main antagonist was, and the main antagonist is Deathstroke, if that tells you anything about how unremarkable this film is.
This is Teen Titans Go! See Space Jam!
This was a really weird way for me to watch Space Jam for the first time. I honestly considered not even ranking this because, to be honest, it's not even a real movie. The premise is that the aliens from Space Jam meet the Titans and insist upon having a watch party with them, and the rest of the movie, I kid you not, is just the movie Space Jam with the Titans making occasional commentary. The only thing here that really resembles a plot is Robin being suspicious of the aliens and trying to prove that they're up to something, which he fails to do until the very end, which is a little bit camp to me. Like, I do think it's kind of funny that the only plot to this movie is Robin trying to force there to be a plot, but that is certainly not enough to save this movie from the bottom tier.
All it takes is one bad day.
I don't anticipate this one being a terribly unpopular opinion. So I have actually read The Killing Joke. I read the comic a little while after watching the movie, and imagine my surprise when the book didn't include any of the horrible bullshit with Barbara. I can understand that The Killing Joke is not long enough to fuel a 70-minute film, and I can even understand wanting to make Barbara a more central part of the plot. What I can't understand is thinking that the best way to do that is by having her get railed by Bruce. Jail time. But even setting that aside, taking all of the new material and just stitching it onto the beginning of the film makes for a horribly uneven project where the second half is considerably better than the first half. I feel really bad for Mark Hamill. He really wanted this movie to be made. Still a soulless cash grab, but at least in a slightly less offensive way than Animal Instincts. Mechs vs. Mutants at least makes an attempt at character work, which Animal Instincts doesn't really do. It's not very interesting character work, but I guess it's there. The action is also okay, but one thing that I do want to flag because it is going to come up on later films is that this is one of a couple of movies to feature Damian, but not have, like, any of Damian's personality. He just reads as a generic Robin who wants to impress Batman, but has none of Damian's viciousness or brutality or even his like pretentiousness or haughtiness, which I think probably has to do with a certain subsect of viewers finding Damian annoying. But those people are weak, and I am not. Give me my 10-year-old murder machine, or just give me Tim Drake.
What have I done?
Such high hopes for the Tomorrowverse. It started out so strong and it just devolved into this. I don't hate the Crisis Trilogy, I really don't. There are parts of it I even like, but it is very hit or miss, and part 2 is definitely the low point of it. It doesn't build on part 1, and it's so overstuffed that even the interesting things don't really have time to land. Like, there are things here that would be interesting in a different movie, but this deep into Crisis, any new information is just distracting us from the emotional impact of the story we're supposed to be getting embroiled in. DC animated movies tend to be short, so screen time is a precious commodity, and too much of it here is spent on lore dumps and underdeveloped cameos for characters and universes we won't even get to explore. This one feels like a weird case of wasted potential. It feels like Bruce Timm did not expect Harley to blow up in the way that she has, and so he tried to make a movie that reflects what he thinks the general populace's idea of Harley is, but he only read like the worst fanfics of her as a reference. This movie has a lot of weirdly conflicting impulses. Like at times it does a really good job of humanizing Harley, such as when they show that she's having a hard time finding honest work post-Arkham. But then there are other moments where they only seem interested in laughing at her or sexualizing her. Like I don't know who this movie is for. I will say the best part of the movie, and probably the reason it doesn't rank lower, is Harley stopping Ivy from plantifying the human race by pouting her into submission.
Harley, I'm warning you. Don't you dare!
An anticlimactic way to end your movie, but funny. Bizarro League is less offensive than it is just like aggressively mid. This was the first DC Lego movie that they did after Lego Batman the movie, and it's clear that they were still kind of figuring out how they wanted to handle that whole situation. The basic plot is that Bizarro gets a hold of the ray that created him and uses it to create Bizarro versions of the entire League, who they eventually team up with in order to fight Darkseid, which is a potentially interesting premise, but I just found myself irritated by how shallow many of the characterizations are, especially Wonder Woman.
But why make duplicates of us? Duplicates with terrible hair and unplucked eyebrows.
Also, the Superman-Batman beef is pretty underdeveloped and just a little too Snyder-esque for my taste. The ending is sweet, but the movie as a whole is kind of just annoying. It's also the shortest film on this list. It's 48 minutes and still manages to struggle with pacing. So I'm going to tread lightly here because while Injustice did piss me the fuck off the first time I watched it, I found that I kind of appreciated it a little bit more on a rewatch. Don't get me wrong, it's still very rushed, and I maintain that any adaptation of Injustice would be much better as a two-parter, a la The Dark Knight Returns or The Death and Return of Superman. However, there are some strong emotional beats here, and I can kind of see what they were going for. It's just that the film is too rushed for any of its emotional moments to really land. Also, I am not opposed to having a lot of violence in my superhero movies, particularly if it feels motivated. I mean, obviously we haven't gotten to where I have placed Apocalypse War yet. However, I fail to see why it was necessary for the Flash to be killed off in the first 10 minutes, only for his death to be immediately overshadowed by Lois dying and all of Metropolis getting nuked. I also fail to see why it was necessary for half the Justice League to die in the dumb final fight. However, Damian does get to be violent, and I do enjoy that.
We're DC superhero girls.
I promise I don't dislike the DC superhero girl movies. I do kind of dislike the Lego versions. This one takes a bunch of characters who are villains in the comics and has them form their own superhero school, which, unbeknownst to them, is run by Lena Luthor and is being used by her to have them commit crimes. I find it kind of cool that Cheetah is the only one who knowingly betrays the group, but then they just walk that back at the end and there are no consequences whatsoever for that plot decision. So that's all for the In Blackest Night tier. Fairly short, like I said, there aren't that many of these movies that I actively dislike. This next tier, however, is full of movies that, while I don't hate them, I don't really care about them. This tier is titled,
I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
like, they're not the worst things in the world, but I also wouldn't go charging into a fire to save them. Rage of Atlantis feels like they didn't mean to make an Aquaman movie, and I say that because it features Atrocitus teaming up with Ocean Master to take over Atlantis, oust Aquaman, and eventually take over the world. And then there's also a subplot with Jessica Cruz learning to use the Power Ring and overcome her fear. I like that they included Atrocitus because I like Green Lantern the Animated Series, but I can't help wonder what he's doing in my Aquaman movie. My theory is that they were originally going to make a Green Lantern movie about Jessica Cruz fighting Atrocitus, but then realized that 2018's Aquaman was set to hit theaters that same year and decided to cash in on the marketing opportunity. Which is kind of sad, honestly, because I actually would have loved a movie about Jessica Cruz fighting Atrocitus. Beware My Power represents the stumbling point for the Tomorrowverse, which is sad both because I had high hopes for the Tomorrowverse, but also because I had high hopes for a Jon Stewart movie. Beware My Power manages to feel insignificant despite the fact that a lot happens in it. They try to make it feel somber and mysterious, but instead it just feels dry. It tries to make some commentary on war and violence, but it doesn't really have much to say on the topic, and Parallax Hal Jordan is really not helping. Also, and this isn't necessarily this movie's fault, but I was really disappointed to realize that the Tomorrowverse was just going to skip forward to the Justice League already being a thing. It just made it really hard to connect with a lot of characters moving forward because they just keep referencing relationships that were built up off screen. At last, we can address the best Batman Unlimited movie, keeping in mind that that is relatively thin praise. Monster Mayhem features the Joker teaming up with a rather motley crew of other Batman villains to finally take over Gotham City by using a computer virus to take control of the city's electrical grid. And the main reason it ranks as the best Batman Unlimited movie is that it's actually pretty funny. Character work is still a no-go unless you count this one scene of Nightwing fighting Scarecrow, which is pretty cool, but it's also a fairly short scene. Really, the thing that pisses me off the most about Monster Mayhem is that it sets itself up as a Halloween movie, only to immediately discard that concept after like the first 5 minutes.
Happy Halloween.
And for what? A Halloween Batman movie featuring monstrous villains like Solomon Grundy and Silver Banshee would have been so fun. And yet, after the first scene, it's literally not even Halloween anymore. I feel like there's more love out there for this movie than I personally feel, but honestly, Public Enemies is kind of a nothing film to me. It's got some good buddy cop vibes going, I guess, if the buddy cops were on the run from the law and the law were Lex Luthor, but all of the characters just feel really underdeveloped, and it feels like it's cashing in a lot on name recognition, you know, on just pulling out characters from the DC back catalogs. I've watched this movie 3 times just looking for something to be excited about, and the best that I've been able to find is just the fact that Tim Daly and Kevin Conroy are in it. The first 15 minutes of this movie are awesome. The Doomsday Battle, the visuals, having Lois go to Martha after Clark dies because she's the only one who understands what she could be going through. As I've rewatched all of these, I've noticed that a lot of the older movies just have this cinematic quality to them that a lot of the newer movies lack. Unfortunately, after Clark dies, the movie pretty much dies with him. But don't worry, unlike with Injustice, they eventually got it right by splitting the story into 2 movies like they always should have.
The choice you make tonight will define you for the rest of your life.
This movie is the direct follow-up to Son of Batman, and while I still think that they could have done a lot more in developing Bruce and Damian's relationship, I do like how they explore Bruce and Damian as individuals, particularly the idea that Bruce is afraid that Damian might represent only the worst parts of him with none of his redeeming qualities, or Damian's fear that he has no agency outside of his family's expectations for him.
I could have killed him, but you were in my head. You wouldn't let me. You, Talia, Ra's, you're all in here. But where am I?
All of that said, this film's slow pacing and dour tone really drag it down. The Court of Owls stuff provides some nice tone and ambiance and visuals, but not really much in the way of interesting characters.
We're just getting started.
So this is less of a Batman movie and more of a Bat Family movie, considering the impetus of the plot is Bruce disappearing, which prompts Dick and Damian to team up with Batwoman and Luke Fox to find him. But really, it's a movie about family dynamics, specifically those between a parent and child. There's a lot of comparing and contrasting different familial relationships, particularly you've got Kate's relationship with her dad versus Dick's relationship with Bruce, Damian's relationship with Talia, and Luke's relationship with his father. However, the thing that I feel like I'm missing, and the thing that's kind of missing for me throughout the DC AMU Batman movies, is still a strong relationship between Bruce and Damian. I don't feel like these movies ever really flesh out their relationship, which is a problem because a lot of the movies hinge on that relationship. This movie does deliver a very important message, though, which is you should not create a soulless clone of your child and then shoot him in the face for wanting a hug. So like with Public Enemies, I understand that there are a lot of people out there who like this movie a lot more than I do, and I can only assume that it's because Sinestro is really compelling in it, and he is, don't get me wrong. The problem is that while the villain may be among the best, Hal Jordan is fucking boring. He is a cardboard cutout of a character in this movie. He has no motivations. He has no inner world. He literally gets drafted into the space cops in this movie. That's the inciting incident. And yet there's nothing to suggest that he has any feelings about that. He is just an empty vessel for the plot. The space stuff is cool, but I try as I might, and I have tried, I just can't get past how uninteresting the main character is. Remember how the world felt watching season 8 of Game of Thrones? That's kind of how I felt watching the last 20 minutes of Justice League Warworld. I love everything before that. The triptych quality of the story, the way it showcases who these characters could be in different settings. I really love the 1940s alien invasion one, but everything after that is really just a slapdash mess of unintroduced lore, capped off with an MCU-esque sneak peek at Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's so wildly disappointing. This movie is for the most part fine. There are some endearing moments, but the pacing is also kind of all over the place, and it's just really the definition of a movie that I would not care enough to go into a burning building to save. The Rock is pretty good as Crypto, however, definitely the best part of this movie is Natasha Lyonne as this turtle who gets super speed.
Where the am I?
Alright, so that brings an end to the bad and mid-tier movies. The dark times are done. From here on out, every movie on this list I at least sort of like, or at least sort of see something redeemable about it. The next tier is called
But that is being human. And that's my greatest strength.
These are movies that are definitely flawed, like they're not the most amazing thing in the world, but they're also not bad enough that I'm inclined to hold their flaws against them. This is the second Justice League team-up movie in the DC AMU after Justice League War, which we haven't reached yet, and I actually really appreciate it for how it puts the Justice League members together. Like, there's this really cool scene where they're investigating, and we really get to see all of their individual skills and personalities and expertises outside of just their powers, which I think is really cool. But the Atlantean stuff is pretty middling, especially the third act. I could also take or leave the Super Wonder romance. The voice cast is an upgrade from Justice League War, however. Rosario Dawson is so much better as Wonder Woman than Michelle Monaghan. And also, it took me 3 viewings of this movie to learn that Orm is voiced by Sam Witwer, which honestly is enough on its own to bump up the Atlantis stuff. At last, the normal superhero girls. Superhero High was a telefilm that they made to try to promote the web series, and it's a pretty standard introduction into the world. Kara joins Superhero High and becomes Supergirl. Barbara Gordon goes from being Superhero High's tech support to Batgirl. It's not really anything super special, but it is a worthwhile introduction. I do find it funny that Granny Goodness had to get Gorilla Grodd fired before she invaded because her mind control doesn't work on gorillas. A 6-part anime anthology directed by Christopher Nolan and set in the same universe as the Dark Knight trilogy is definitely what I would call a swing. Unfortunately, I only really like half of these. Some of them I really like the story, but the animation I find off-putting. Shout out to this one image where Bruce kind of looks like Walmart Light Yagami. I did like the last 2 segments though, so it at least ends on a strong note. And as always, Kevin Conroy can do no wrong. Weirdly, Apocalypse is neither a Superman or a Batman movie. It's kind of a Supergirl movie, except the story isn't really told from Supergirl's perspective, which just makes the pacing and themes of the movie really weird. It mostly ranks this high because it has some of the best fight scenes in DC animation. Like, this stuff is fluid. Also, it features the OG Justice League voice cast, plus Andre Braugher as Darkseid, rest in peace. This was the last DC Lego movie before the brand was bought by Universal, which also killed any hopes of a Lego Batman sequel. Magic and Monsters relies a lot on the charm of seeing the Justice League get turned into children, but I honestly don't think that they capitalized enough on that for the charm to really come through. The funniest part is Batman being unable to reach the pedals on the Batmobile. However, where the charm does come through is with Billy's storyline with Bruce and learning to trust each other, learning to be accepted into a family. It's cute. It's very Annie. I do feel I must question why they gave Jessica Cruz a Hispanic accent in this movie, considering that she is canonically from Portland. And even if you want to claim this is a different continuity, she was in Rage of Atlantis without one. Also, it's kind of funny that due to the limitations of the Lego animation style, when they get turned into kids, you can't really immediately tell, except for Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, who lose this little negative space that they add on to all of the girl Legos to show that they have curves. That's not really relevant to the ranking. I just really wanted an opportunity to bring it up. I think it's so stupid. Not to be confused with the Lego Batman movie, Lego Batman the movie is basically Lego Batman the game, and I mean that very literally. They literally took a lot of the cutscenes from the game and just put them into the movie and also reused a lot of the voice recordings. To an extent, that is part of why I've docked this movie down a little bit, because it does feel kind of weirdly unoriginal to me. I feel like a lot of what's happening I have seen elsewhere. It does feature Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor, which is always a dub. Also, I don't know why nobody's thought of having Lex Luthor have a one-sided rivalry with Bruce Wayne. That's funny. However, the Batman-Superman rivalry is kind of underdeveloped to me, and the Deus Ex Machina ending really bugs me. You're telling me they couldn't have called in the League at any point prior to this? It's honestly kind of sad how often DC struggles to tell compelling stories about Atlantis. This one is at least better than Throne of Atlantis because the Atlanteans in question are at least interesting. However, one thing that I don't like about the DC superhero girl movies is how scattered they are. Like, this one has Wonder Woman's whole trauma about the ocean and having almost drowned as a kid. Supergirl and Batgirl have a whole power swapping storyline. Raven is also here. The whole thing just kind of gets bogged down by subplots. I read an article where someone stated that this movie would have been better off as a Wonder Woman movie, and I gotta say they made some points. Aztec Batman is the most recent DC animated movie, having come out only a couple of months ago. It actually got a theatrical release in Mexico and was a co-pro with a Mexican production house. And while I really enjoy the exploration of Mesoamerican history and the Spanish conquest, this never fully translates as a Batman story. This version of Bruce, whose name is Yohali, never really feels like a detective or a crusader, more like Inigo Montoya. Some really lovely visuals though.
Let's do this.
So this is one of two endings for the DC AMU. This one closes out the Tomorrowverse, and it's okay. It's certainly ambitious, but my problem with the Tomorrowverse as a whole is that it never really gives you the chance to really connect with any of the characters. I like the realization that the second flashpoint that Barry caused basically broke the universe, and I like how it gets resolved, this idea of all the heroes stepping into this unknown future, and this underlying idea that the characters we love never really die, they just get reincarnated. But the trade-off of all of that symbolism is that the characters start to feel more like symbols than characters.
The Justice League doesn't quit.
This is the other universe ender, except it ended the first leg of the DC AMU and inadvertently created the Tomorrowverse. A lot of people don't care for this movie, and I get why. The brutality of watching a lot of the characters that you've spent 15 movies really investing in get brutally murdered in the first 10 minutes is a lot to handle, but I can't lie, I kind of appreciate like the operatic quality of it. That said, watching it a second time was significantly different because once you know everything that happens, this movie is kind of a bummer. The thing that puts it above Crisis Part 3 for me is that while it does suck to see all of these characters just wiped off the board right at the beginning, the characters that do survive the prologue are at least well utilized. I can't confidently say the same for Crisis. One of my favorite silly moments in DC animation is the resolution to Clark's dilemma about whether or not to include Lois in his life or pursue a relationship with her for fear of putting her in danger. Is him realizing that Lois is going to throw herself into danger no matter what he does.
Lane sure lives dangerously.
Yes. Yes, she does.
I just think it's funny that his big aha moment is just realizing that Lois has agency. It's camp. It's like himbo discovers feminism for the first time and thinks it's the coolest thing in the world. The rest of the movie is just okay, but the ending tickles me. Gotham City Breakout sees the Justice League and the Bat family bully Batman into finally taking a vacation while Superman stays behind to babysit Gotham. And then while Bruce, Dick, and Barbara get into this whole situation with Deathstroke and these lizard people called the Troglowogs, Superman back in Gotham learns what European pickpockets have been learning about Americans, which is that there is no substitute for crazy. My biggest complaint here is that the B plot is way funnier than the A plot. The Trogglewog stuff is fun enough, but like it kind of just feels like they needed something for Batman to do, even though watching Superman get dog-walked by the entire Gotham City Rogues Gallery for 70 minutes would have been a perfectly enjoyable time. That's fucking funny. When I said every DC animated movie, I meant it. If you have not heard of Gen 13, don't worry, you are in good company, but it was originally published in 1993 by Wildstorm Publishing before eventually becoming an imprint of DC Comics in 98, was canceled multiple times before permanently ending in 2004. The characters were eventually folded into the main DC continuity post-Flashpoint, but haven't really been seen much, if at all, post-New 52. The movie is about Caitlin Fairchild, your average not like other girls, who joins this military academy where, unbeknownst to her, they are experimenting on teenagers to try to create superpowered soldiers. It's pretty solid, and the visuals are actually fairly impressive considering how low the budget probably was. There's also a really nice sense of ambiance to everything. They really try to build up the mystery aspect. The main reason Gen 13 ranks this low is because it was clearly ramping up to later projects that never materialized. Also, it's just very 90s in a way that occasionally bugged me. It does have a crazy voice cast though. Cloris Leachman, John Delancey, Lauren Lane, Elizabeth Daly, Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and oh yeah, Mark Hamill.
We're DC
This was the first real DC superhero girls movie, and it features Eclipso trying to take over the world while the students wait to see who wins the coveted Hero of the Year award. The Eclipso stuff is pretty hit or miss, although her backstory is actually pretty interesting. I mostly just like that Bumblebee wins the award at the end after throwing herself on the front lines at the risk of staying permanently shrunken. She deserved it.
Time to play. Bring it!
This is my favorite of the DC superhero girl movies, at least before the Lauren Faust reboot, and I'm not gonna lie, that probably mainly just comes down to the Starfire and Blackfire storyline. I just think it's cute. I also think that this one just has the best, high school shenanigans. They get into a food fight with their rival schools, which include the Furies of Apocalypse and an outer space academy run by Sinestro. I admittedly could give less of a shit about Lena Luthor as the very obvious villain.
I'm calling her Vixen.
Let me just take this as an opportunity to say, put Vixen in more things. Make more merch for her. I don't have a Vixen pop to show you for this bit, and I should. But anyways, this was the first miniseries that DC produced as an offshoot to the Arrowverse, and it's pretty solid. I like Mari as a protagonist. I think they make really cool use of her powers. There's a scene where she, summons the spirit of an octopus to hold the villain underwater. That's awesome. The main problems are some rushed narrative beats, and also the fact that the Arrowverse actors don't know the first thing about voice acting.
Let me handle this. I kind of have a rapport with metahumans.
You throw them in your pipeline prison.
Not helping.
I'm calling her Vixen.
Because what? She moves like a fox?
Because she is a fox. Check out that hotness.
Carlos Valdez at least got better in the next Arrowverse animated property he was in, but Grant Gustin and Stephen Amell were rightfully recast.
This world belongs to everyone!
Justice League War gets a lot of undeserved hate in my opinion. Yes, Michelle Monaghan's Wonder Woman is hit or miss. Yes, the Batman-Superman fight is gratuitous and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, I like that it is a proper Justice League team-up movie, which we actually don't have very many of. So I like that here we actually get to see how these different personalities bounce off of each other, especially considering that these particular versions of the characters are pretty well fleshed out and feel very distinct from one another. All except for Superman, whose primary character trait in this movie appears to be strong. I find this movie very easy to just kind of put on in the background, which is why I've watched it so many times. This one hit me in a way that I didn't totally expect, mainly because it's partially a coming out story. Finally, some queer representation. I don't think I really realized how little of that DC has in its on-screen media. I mean, I did, but this movie made me really realize it. The actual Nazi stuff is pretty underdeveloped, but Melissa Benoist is actually quite good as Overgirl. Maybe she could give voice acting lessons to the other two. At last, we have arrived at the best DC superhero girls movie. Congratulations, Lauren Faust. However, this movie is also a Teen Titans Go crossover in the same way that Teen Titans Go See Space Jam is a movie, in name only. The Titans are here intermittently, sometimes just to lampshade the fact that they have nothing to do with the story. There is this great gag at the end where they reveal that the Teen Titans have been using the villain's evil gem this whole time to prop up their TV. But the rest of the movie is fun too. I like the whole storyline with Supergirl. I like what they do with Wonder Woman's character. I'm shocked that more people have not thought to make Supergirl buff. Well, I guess that's not really shocking. So Wonder Woman 2009 and I have been on a journey over the years. I watched it once, thought it was pretty good, but there were a couple of things that bugged me. I watched it again, and the things that bugged me before bugged me so much that I thought I hated it. Then I rewatched it again for this video and have fallen somewhere in between. The good parts of this movie are very good. I'm actually fascinated by its exploration of the ways in which women can perpetuate misogyny against each other, particularly by restricting the roles that each other are able to fill or by devaluing each other's areas of expertise. What I hated then and hate now is this greasy motherfucker. For a movie about Wonder Woman, the first feature-length Wonder Woman film, by the way, to feature a not all men speech delivered by a demonstrated horn dog.
God, your daughter's got a nice rack.
Who not an hour prior tried to get Diana drunk so that he could sleep with her, is a decision so baffling I could not wrap my head around it. until I realized that a lot of the Steve Trevor stuff was added in by Michael Jelenic after Gail Simone finished the storyboard. And don't get me wrong, this movie still has some interesting things to say about feminism, even if its storyline is inherently heteronormative and restricted mostly to white women. And I'm also not against making Steve Trevor a more complicated and less immediately likable character, but every scene in this movie with him in it drags it down. Like, you get great stuff like this.
But in close like they are, the thrust is a better move as it's more likely to cause real injury. Do you understand?
Uh-huh.
Now go. Unleash hell. Remarkable. The advanced brainwashing that has been perpetuated upon the females of your culture. Raised from birth to believe they're not strong enough to compete with the boys. And then as adults, taught to trade on their very femininity.
But then Steve will say something like this.
Women always go for the bad boy. If the god of dependability was trying to get with her, she'd be like, "You're really sweet, but I just think of you as a friend."
I feel a tide of vomit burn the back of my throat.
Their kiss at the end is also so unearned. I cringe every time, but I should probably move on now or I might make a Raylo reference.
Hush, Batman. Hush.
I gotta be honest, I kind of hate that the best DC AMU Batman movie is the only one that Damian's not in. I mean, he is in it, but for like 2 seconds. The central mystery here is cool, but the star of the show really is Bruce and Selina's relationship. The fact that we get to finally see them actually be together, only to be torn apart by the realization of what fundamentally different ideologies they have, is so satisfying. The Riddler reveal is silly, though. So I'll admit I was skeptical from the beginning about them doing Lego Death in the Family, but then the movie was actually pretty good. Until it pissed me off. As you will see later on, I am quite a big fan of the Red Hood storyline, and I just could not stand the way in which they watered down Jason Todd's backstory so that his disappearance just becomes this petty act of rebellion. I get that this is a kid's movie, so they can't exactly go full crowbar. Also, I'm not a stickler for fidelity to the source material. Like, I like when adaptations change things in creative ways, but it just feels like you can feel them tiptoeing around the source material rather than actually engaging with it. Adaptational components aside, it is a fairly good movie. The action scenes are really good, especially the Nightwing Red Hood fight, and it makes a lot of surprising but very welcome jabs at billionaires. But points off for once again defanging Damian. Who is this character? Who is this supposed to be? Surely not Damian Wayne.
Do it now!
So let's get this out of the way. This is not a Batman movie. This is a Suicide Squad movie. It's actually one of a couple of Batman movies that don't need to be labeled as Batman movies, but we can get into that some other time. This is a Suicide Squad movie, and it's a pretty good one. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it has like major themes or interesting character arcs, but it's got style out the ass and some genuinely interesting twists and turns. Hynden Walsh should voice Harley Quinn more often. We can maybe give Tara Strong a break. Just maybe a little less of Harley sleeping with random men for shock value if we could. Lovecraftian Batman, complete with cosmic horrors and light Lovecraftian racism. As an avid horror fan, I am all for Batman incorporating horror elements, and I do think that The Doom That Came to Gotham does a really good job of setting up this tone, this atmosphere, and just this sense of foreboding. I like the way that it utilizes the Gotham Rogues Gallery. I like the mythos that it builds up around Batman and how it connects all of it to Batman's parents. The main thing I have to dock points for, though, is for the Orientalism and exotic foreigner trope that's kind of all over it. They try to mitigate this somewhat with Indian Jason Todd and subbing Tim Drake out for Kylie Kane, but it doesn't really work, especially considering how quickly into the movie they kill off Indian Jason Todd.
Verdict, life or death.
So I kind of went back and forth on whether or not to include this movie because it does technically fall under the category of DC Showcase, but ultimately decided fuck it, we ball. Death in the Family is the interactive sequel to Batman Under the Red Hood, in which you get to change the outcome of that film's story by changing key plot events. The first one being whether or not Jason actually dies in the explosion. Because of that, it's also the only film on this list that you can't stream. You have to watch the physical DVD or else you won't be able to actually make the choices. The interactive angle is fun, and I love it as a concept because it actually calls back to the original Death in the Family storyline, in which DC readers got to call in to decide whether or not Jason Todd would actually live or die, and boy did they decide. But they definitely could have done a better job of fleshing out the different endings here. They advertise 9 different story paths, which is kind of a bald-faced lie, because if you choose for Jason to die, then the events of the film just play out as they already did, and you just get a recap of Under the Red Hood. The only option that gives you further choices down the line is for Jason to live, but Bruce to die. And even then, some endings are more rewarding than others. I like the Zurinar ending, I like the Tim Drake ending, but it really pisses me off and kind of violates the spirit of an interactive film that it doesn't matter whether or not you choose to kill Joker on the bridge. Regardless of which choice you make, the story progresses the same way. Don't piss me off. This is definitely worth checking out if you are a fan of Under the Red Hood, which I am, but even when I was having a good time with it, I wasn't thinking, wow, this is so engaging, this is such a fun experience. I was thinking, God, Under the Red Hood is so good. This movie gets a lot of mileage out of Kathy Duquesne serving absolute no, but actually Mystery of the Batwoman is probably the weakest of the classic DCAU movies, which is to say it's still pretty entertaining. I especially like how each of the three Batwomen kind of represents different facets of what at the time would have been called like the modern woman. Points off, however, for having Barbara try to flirt with Bruce in that one scene. Bruce Timm, I am begging you to stop it. I will get the spray bottle.
Welcome to Earth.
So Matt Bomer voices Superman in this movie. I just wanted to throw that out there. It's also a pretty strong movie, although it does feel like a little bit of a missed opportunity to me to really dig into how the destruction of Krypton affected Clark and Kara differently. It does do that a little bit, but it's more interested in the Clark and Lois relationship, and Kara's trauma kind of gets relegated to a subplot. I quite like Stana Katic as Lois Lane, though. I think it's really funny that this movie features Lex Luthor getting frozen in an iceberg and then getting avatared out 1,000 years later by a character who just happens to be voiced by Dante Basco. That aside, this movie has a lot going for it. My biggest problem is just that it's too short. This is one of the only movies on this list that clocks in at just under an hour, and I can't help but feel that Karate Kid and Dawnstar's arcs would be a lot more satisfying if we knew more about their backstories. That said, I do think it's really funny to watch the Justice League playing keep away against the Legion of Doom with baby Kal-El.
To end this.
So I had never actually heard of RWBY before I watched part 1 of this crossover. I have now seen all 9 seasons of RWBY. Part 2 is, in my opinion, a little bit of a step down from part 1. It's a lot more reliant on having seen RWBY to understand the character arcs. However, it still has sick action sequences. I like how they pair up the characters, particularly with Yang being the one to help Barry with his PTSD. That said, I don't like the art style of the DC universe in this movie. I get that in the first movie it was the Justice League going into the RWBY universe, and in this movie it's vice versa. However, the looks of the Justice League in the first movie were just so dynamic and new and interesting that going back to a more classic Justice League look feels kind of boring. Also, why does Batman look so shiny?
Let's do this.
Plug it off.
So one thing about me, I love me some John Constantine. A messy, British, drunken, bisexual warlock, sign me up. As a movie though, Justice League Dark is probably a bit more interested in like introducing the viewer to the mystical side of the DC universe than it is like actually generating a really compelling plot. But if I'm honest, I'm kind of fine with that. I like magic, I like the supernatural, I always have. So the idea of an entire branch of the Justice League entirely dedicated to that is just so cool to me.
If there's one thing I've learned over the years, is that there are no happy endings.
As I said, I love me some John Constantine. City of Demons follows after Justice League Dark, and like Justice League Dark, it's a little bit more interested in expanding the mystical side of the DC universe than it is in like narrative and plot development. However, it does do a lot more to excavate its main character. I think Matt Ryan is the only person who should ever be allowed to play Constantine in any medium. I think he should have that role until he dies. And as far as I can tell, both DC and Matt Ryan agree with me. I think the relationships here are really compelling, and the ending is so tragic, even if it is just like the littlest bit trite. Men are allowed to be friends with each other, however, I do choose to believe that John was in love with this guy. This movie doesn't get the credit I feel like it deserves. Emerald Knights is less of one central narrative than it is a series of vignettes about different members of the Green Lantern Corps told by Hal Jordan to Aricia Rabb, who is voiced by Elizabeth Moss, with the backdrop of the entire Corps trying to stop this antimatter creature from escaping from a sun and destroying the universe. I do find each vignette to be strong on its own, but Lyra's is definitely my favorite, and the ending where novice Aricia comes up with the plan to save everyone and gets added to the legend book really gets to me.
5, 4, 3,
Watching Crisis Part 1 actually gave me hope that the Tomorrowverse might finish strong. This movie has a fairly untraditional narrative structure, bouncing around in time a lot, but it anchors itself in Barry, and he becomes a really strong emotional core to the story. As I said, I'm not a fan of how the Justice League coming together is portrayed through montage. However, I do like the Amazo storyline, I like where it leads, and the ending is just such an emotional gut punch. So that is it for But That Is Being Human. Our next tier is titled
Feeling the Aster.
Agreed. This has been a good day.
And if you don't get that reference, you need to watch Young Justice. I like that Gotham by Gaslight takes the opportunity to really explore themes of like sexism and class inequality rather than just cashing in on the aesthetics of the Victorian period, although I do think that they probably could have gone a little bit deeper into some of those topics. But it's still a very enjoyable movie, like a little novelty treat. I'm not crazy about Jennifer Carpenter's performance as Catwoman though. Something about her voice is just a little bit stilted to me. This movie is about ADHD. The entire plot is about the Justice League getting frustrated with the Flash because he's always late and always distracted. He ends up going on this journey that requires him to learn patience, focus, and planning, and then the Justice League ends up experiencing what the flow of time feels like to him and learn to be more patient with him. I feel like if you showed this movie to a kid who struggled with ADHD, then the Flash would automatically become their favorite superhero, and isn't that really what it's all about? The only downsides are that the Adams whole storyline feels a bit out of place to me, and also Kevin Michael Richardson's Dr. Fate makes me uncomfortable. Points for the musical number though.
'Cause it's magic, baby. Time to get it done. Magic, baby. It's just a little magic.
Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy?
So this was not the first Scooby-Doo DC crossover, and it's not the last one that you will see on this list. In this movie, the Scooby Gang gets called into Metropolis to help investigate the Justice League's disappearance, and while it's an overall good time, I do feel like it gets a little bit too distracted mining the Hall of Justice for comic book throwbacks to really craft a compelling mystery. If I'm honest, the main reason it ranks this high is because of this one bit where Lois and Jimmy are unable to recognize Velma without her glasses, which I think is so fucking funny. Legion of Superheroes sees Clark take Kara into the future to meet the Legion after she struggles to assimilate to modern Earth culture. And right off the bat, I appreciate the way that it shows Kara just not vibing at all with human society. But even more than that, I find myself really appreciating the romance between her and Brainiac. The way that she slowly starts to recognize him as an outcast, just like her, someone who feels out of place and finding kinship with him over that. While this is my favorite Kara-centric movie, I find that there's still just an overall lack of on-screen Supergirl media that I really vibe with, which is why I am so excited for Millie Alcock.
Stronger together than apart.
Another Batman movie that really didn't need to be a Batman movie, although if I'm honest, I don't really know what else it would have been. Soul of the Dragon is basically a send-up to like 1970s style kung fu movies, and it's more ensemble than it is solo flick. We've got Lady Shiva, Bronze Tiger, Cheshire in a drastically reduced role, R.I.P. girl, I loved you in Young Justice. Overall, I like how character-focused this film is, but I don't like that Batman is kind of the least important character in the group. It is very in character though for him to just walk right into a portal to hell while everybody else is busy arguing over who should be the one to walk into the portal to hell. This movie might be benefiting a little bit from how much I like The Death of Superman, but I do think that it's a worthy follow-up. I really find that Rebecca Romijn's performance as Lois is kind of just the emotional anchor of this Superman duology. Rainn Wilson as Lex Luthor is fun though, he's such a queenie little bitch. Gods and Monsters focuses on an alternate universe where the Justice League is comprised of very different, significantly harsher versions of themselves. Superman is the son of Zod, raised by migrant workers. Wonder Woman is a refugee from New Genesis, and Batman is a literal vampire.
Wow, someone forgot to take their true blood tonight.
I'm not a vampire.
The movie is well-paced, and the backstories that they give to each of these characters are sublime, especially Wonder Woman's backstory. That could have been its own movie. My biggest problem is just that there are, I feel, some plot holes in this movie. Namely, if all Will needed was to get access to the technology in the Hall of Justice, then what was the point of framing the Justice League for all of these murders, or for murdering those scientists in the first place? Also, staging his own assault was such an unnecessarily risky move. Like, he had no way of guaranteeing that he was going to survive this. Anyway, shout out to this one scene of yassified Jimmy Olsen. No one has ever adapted the Judas Contract storyline better than the 2003 Teen Titans show, but this movie is still pretty good. I like the family vibes that it has. I like that everyone kind of gets their moment, especially Dick. If I have two complaints, they are that the intro scene at the beginning, while sweet, is not really necessary and kind of throws off the narrative focus of the movie, and Tara never really earns the praise that Beast Boy heaps on her at the end. So this is going to be a longer one, but if I'm honest, I had a difficult time ranking this movie, primarily because as an American who has witnessed the kind of shit that my country has gotten up to, I find it very hard to feel anything resembling optimism about America, which is very much what this movie is trying to push. However, my opinion did change somewhat when I learned that the writer of the original comic is not American. So it wasn't coming from like this nationalist point of view, it was coming from the point of view of an outsider looking at America and going, "Hey America, fuck's going on? You guys okay? You don't seem okay." That did bump this up a few points for me, but I still think that there are some flaws in its narrative. Primarily the way that humanity gets continually conflated with Americans. Like, Jean wants to leave Earth because he thinks humanity is too cruel and self-serving, but he's only really had first-hand experience with Americans. Diana is doubtful about the world of man after seeing what America has become post-Korea. Even the ending, which should be about all the people of the world coming together to face a common threat, really only focuses on American forces. I feel like any deconstruction of American xenophobia needs to involve us building global community instead of just placing ourselves at the center of what should be a global conflict. They also drastically reduced the role of the one black guy in the comics. That was a lot, but like I said, I grappled with this movie, so to finish, this movie has one of the most insane voice casts I've ever seen. Kyle MacLachlan is Superman, Lucy Lawless is Wonder Woman, David Boreanaz is Hal Jordan, Neil Patrick Harris is The Flash, Kira Sedgwick is Lois Lane, and Brooke Shields is Carol Ferris. The hijinks here are fun. My favorite part is probably Wonder Woman accidentally founding the Amazons. However, it's really the third act of this movie that sells it. I have no idea how this Voltron transformation works, but it's exactly the kind of out there thing you would expect from a DC Lego movie. Also, as somebody who has proudly stated that I would throw ass to the Justice League animated theme song, I love the throwback in the opening. Superman Red Son has a skosh of the same American propaganda that The New Frontier had. However, it's less obtrusive because it's more focused on Superman's ideology, and it's less scattered because it's more focused on his individual arc as a character. And I cannot emphasize this enough, seeing Wonder Woman make Superman look like a little bitch
You're just another pathetic man, aren't you?
was like serotonin directly into my skull. What I really appreciate about this movie is its commentary on neurodiversity. I like that Jessica and Starboy bond over their shared experiences, Jessica having severe PTSD after watching her friends get murdered, and Starboy having like futuristic schizophrenia that he's no longer able to treat. Miss Martian's role in the plot though feels kind of out of place. Like, it's her biggest and kind of only film appearance to date, but she doesn't really have anything to do with the main story. That said, Starboy's sacrifice and Jessica reciting the Green Lantern Oath are the kind of cinematic moments that bring you coming back to DC animated movies. This movie is what made me realize that the LEGO DC movies could be good. Attack of the Legion of Doom immediately follows up Bizarro League, but it already feels like such an elevation from that movie in terms of humor, while also still definitively being aimed at a younger audience. It's also genuinely funny. I laughed out loud at the Legion of Doom holding new member tryout via a Wipeout-style obstacle course. I like that Martian Manhunter is in it. For those who are unaware, Martian Manhunter is one of my favorite DC characters. Many people would say that Cosmic Clash is the better of the LEGO DC movies, but I think I just like Cyborg's arc in this movie more than I like Batman's arc in Cosmic Clash of learning to admit that his teammates are his friends. Also, the success of any LEGO DC movie kind of depends on how much the inherent consumerism annoys me, and this movie manages to sidestep that for the most part.
Justice League, meet Ruby, Yang, and Blake.
I think the thing that I like best about this movie is that it just felt like a breath of fresh air when it came out. Like, in a landscape full of shared universes and different iterations on Batman, they really took a swing on a movie as weird as the Justice League entering the Ruby universe and fighting Grimm alongside the cast of a B-level American anime. The action scenes are good, the character designs are eye-catching, and I really like how they utilize the characters. Like, I like that they pair Weiss up with Batman, I like that Jessica gets a really solid arc in this movie. It's just a good time.
If I die, you die first!
So I have actually read All-Star Superman, and I will say reading the comic actually kind of reinforced my decision to put the movie a little bit lower. The basic plot of All-Star Superman is that the Man of Steel is dying. He flies too close to the sun, quite literally, and ends up getting radiation poisoning, and is told that he's going to die, so the entire story is basically his farewell tour. My biggest problem with the film adaptation is that it takes a lot of shortcuts, it removes a lot of content, and I get that they kind of had to do that for length, but I also kind of have to wonder if the incredibly episodic nature of the All-Star Superman comic precludes it from being successfully adapted onto the screen. I do think that they do the best that they can with it. The ending still has a pretty strong impact, although I don't like the implication that Lois is going to be used as an incubator for Superman 2.0. That's not in the comic.
Titans, go!
As a queer person, I'm obviously a big fan of the found family trope, which is part of why I like Teen Titans and Young Justice. And I'm also a fan of horror, so naturally I quite like this movie. The plot is pretty simple. Damian gets shipped off to the Titans for being a brat, Raven realizes that Trigon is coming after her, and the whole team has to band together to stop him from destroying the world. Meanwhile, some of Trigon's demons have started to possess members of the Justice League. There are some really fun bits like Damian schooling Beast Boy at Dance Dance Revolution, or the Sailor Moon-esque transformation sequence. But one of my favorite moments really is Diana getting depossessed.
Who are you?
I am corruption incarnate.
The lasso commands you answer.
I am Diana of Themyscira!
It's so good. I like to think of this as the Goonies of DC animated movies, and not just because the director of the movie said as much on the DVD commentary. It's just that Battle of the Super Sons has that like 80s adventure film vibes, the mostly small town setting, the children doing what adults are unable to do, the invasion of the body snatchers type plot. The vibes are immaculate. The father-son dynamics are so adorable. I love the way that they bounce Damian and John off of each other. It's just a great time. And best of all, Damian gets to be a dick. Fun fact, the Batman vs. Dracula may have been the first DC animated movie I ever watched. I have a very hazy memory of seeing it on TV as a kid and being absolutely terrified of it. This is like the quintessential DC Halloween movie. It's giving tone, it's giving atmosphere, it's giving aesthetics. I don't even feel compelled to really tell you anything about the plot. I mean, it's Batman vs. Dracula, figure it out. Some may balk at the fact that it's based on the 2004 Batman show and utilizes that show's character designs, but those people are weak, and I am not.
Even in the face of Armageddon, shall not compromise on this.
Like All-Star Superman, Watchmen just works so well as a comic that I feel like any attempt to adapt it into a screen medium is going to feel like it's missing something. This adaptation uses all CGI animation and it looks good at parts, but there are also moments where it looks kind of awkward, specifically when the characters are fighting or kissing. Also, despite having provenly talented voice actors, a lot of them feel kind of stiff. I really don't like Titus Welliver as Rorschach. He sounds like he swallowed gravel, although I do like Michael Cerveris as Dr. Manhattan. His whole flashback monologue, if it can be called a flashback, is probably my favorite part of the movie. If James Gunn's 2021 masterpiece didn't exist, I would easily call Hell to Pay my favorite Suicide Squad movie, which I suppose would be thin praise. The premise is admittedly a little hokey. The Suicide Squad is sent out to retrieve a card that, according to legend, will allow anyone who dies holding it to bypass hell and go straight to heaven. However, that ends up being a really solid metaphor for redemption. I do think that in terms of Suicide Squad movies, Assault on Arkham has this one beat in terms of action and visual style, but this one locks in on character and theme, which I'm always going to reward over aesthetics. I'm fairly certain that anyone who grew up on Cartoon Network in the 2000s remembers where they were when this happened.
Perhaps I may be of assistance.
sumimasen.
If The Batman vs. Dracula was not the first DC animated movie I ever watched, then Trouble in Tokyo definitely was, because this show was foundational for many of us. Trouble in Tokyo is the only film directly based on the 03 Teen Titans series and kind of serves as that show's finale. And if I'm being honest, it is somewhat underwhelming as a swan song to the show. It works as like an extended episode of the show. Like, I could believe that this was a scrapped concept for a two-parter, but the fact that the conflict is based on a villain that we've never seen in the show before, and the fact that it really only focuses on Robin and Starfire and not any of the other team members, kind of makes it feel like a lackluster send-off. It does, however, have style out the ass. Beast Boy singing karaoke to a botched, transliterated version of the Teen Titans theme song is very funny, and the best way that it honors the show is by finally making Robin and Starfire canon. So Knights and Dragons presents us with a more anti-hero version of Deathstroke, and accordingly, it's just as focused on family drama as it is like spy thriller action. There is still plenty of action to go around, along with some really crunchy cinematic visuals, but it's really the relationships between the characters that drives this movie. Like, in the kindest possible way, this is kind of like the Fast and Furious of DC animated movies. I mostly feel really affected by Rose and Joseph's relationship. Like, there's just something that feels so authentic about it, but the ending also really gets to me. Now, shit like this is exactly why I love DC animated movies. The DCEU could never attempt this. The MCU would never take so big a swing. But because the DC animated movies tend to fly under the radar, they're allowed to do weird shit like this without DC really worrying about them affecting their brand. And an 85-minute time travel isekai film about Batman, the entire Bat family, and the entire Rogues Gallery getting transported back to feudal Japan is exactly the kind of weird shit I'm in it for. I know it's not technically isekai, but it feels like it. This movie is on the whole spectacular. The only thing that's really holding it back from the next tier up is some wonky pacing and a third act that kind of goes off the rails. The Batman Joker fight is epic though. I think it's really interesting how often DC ends up borrowing from anime for its animated movies. Anyways, Catwoman Hunted is a blast. It is sleek, it is sharp to the touch. It has this really distinct style that I clocked on a rewatch as being kind of reminiscent of Lupin III, only to look it up and discover that that was in fact one of Greg Weisman's inspirations. Oh yeah, also this movie was written by Greg Weisman, one of the masterminds behind Young Justice. Subtlety is certainly not one of this movie's virtues. There are moments where the witty banter kind of starts to feel heavy-handed. I can't really decide if the sapphic subtext is exploitative or not, considering that this version of Selina is very clearly still devoted to Bruce. And also it is sometimes a victim of its own ambition, just introducing more and more DC characters, but this is a Greg Weisman production, so that is kind of to be expected. But the tone, the pacing, the finale, and the overall take on Selina's character is just mwah. Editor me, somehow I recorded this entire thing and neglected to even mention that Liz Gillies of Victorious fame voices Selina and Stephanie Beatrice voices Batwoman. Do with that what you will. We are closing in on our top tiers, so my second highest tier is called...
Maybe that's the real punk rock.
This is for movies that are not just good and they're not just watchable, but they're going further, right? They're giving me something extra. They're showing me what superhero excellence in this medium can really look like.
Holy Scooby-Dooby-Doo, Batman! Scooby-Doo and Batman, the Brave and the Bold.
In Julia Cudney's video ranking every Scooby-Doo movie, she talks about how she would probably be a bigger fan of the Brave and the Bold if she were a bigger fan of Batman. I'm happy to report I am the target audience for this movie. The Brave and the Bold features the Scooby Gang getting recruited by Batman into the mystery analysts of Gotham, and ultimately getting framed while trying to help him solve his mysterious unsolved mystery. There is a lot of fan service here, but it's also a Batman and Scooby-Doo crossover, so I'm not really sure what you were expecting. But unlike with Scooby-Doo and Crypto 2, I don't feel like all of the deep cuts detract from it having a really good mystery, which also means I can appreciate the deep cuts even more. Also, this scene with the doors at Arkham is hilarious.
Let's end this.
It's actually kind of hilarious that this movie is called Batman vs. TMNT, considering they only fight one time and the turtles get absolutely curb stomped. This movie is the perfect crossover. It brings together all the best parts of both of its properties and blends them together for such a fun, character-driven, surprisingly emotionally resonant time. I love how the turtles are portrayed. I love the character designs. The fight scenes are incredibly dynamic. Damian is also here, and while he's not violent per se, he is bitchy, which I will take. This movie also features Darren Criss as Raphael and Rachel Bloom of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend fame as Batgirl. Like, what else need I say? This movie is so weird, and I love it. Yakuza League is the direct sequel to Batman Ninja and one of the most recent DC animated movies, having come out just earlier this year, except instead of traveling back in time, it features the Bat family returning to the present day only to find that the timeline has been messed with. Yakuza regularly rain from the sky, the islands of Japan have completely disappeared, and the Justice League have been replaced with Yakuza versions of themselves. And if that's not enough to convince you that this movie is a great time, it has sick visuals, a banging score, and a lot of really funny references to modern Japanese culture, including this one scene where Wonder Woman just randomly starts singing a ballad. This movie is not a musical, by the way. It also, in my opinion, has a more emotionally resonant ending than Batman Ninja. I love this scene of Batman facing down the Yakuza Superman while singing the praises of his version of Superman. I would take 4 sequels. I love this movie.
This all says war.
Watchmen Chapter 2 is at least a more exciting watch than Chapter 1. Like, Chapter 1 really is a lot of, like, exposition and character building, but not a lot actually happens, while so much happens in Chapter 2. I really like Laurie's conversation with Dr. Manhattan on Mars, the whole thermodynamic miracle monologue. I like the prison breakout, and I love the Tales of the Black Freighter scenes. Honestly, those scenes alone might be what elevates this movie into the real punk rock. I fear the best voice acting in this movie is coming from Phil Lamar.
My name is Kal-El of Krypton, and I come in peace.
So I do like Superman Man of Tomorrow a bit less than I used to. I still like it, obviously, but it doesn't have quite the same glow that it used to have to me, and I think that is partially because a lot of the things that I liked about it, its softer version of Clark Kent, its bright, hopeful tone, its exploration of Clark's loneliness, have since been done better by my adventures with Superman. But I still love the overall tone and atmosphere, you know? When I say that it's come down, I mean that once upon a time it would have been in my top 10, and now it's just in my top 25. This was the first film of the Tomorrowverse, and it felt like such a breath of fresh air coming off of Apocalypse War. I love the opening scene where little Clark gets overwhelmed and has to have his dad come pick him up because the friend he was having a sleepover with got scared watching an alien movie. It's so tender, and it's such a great way of putting us into Clark's head right at the beginning of the movie. And I also love Clark and John's interactions because, again, I love Martian Manhunter. Although I should point out that the racism allegory with Parasite doesn't really work, considering he does actually, you know, kill people. This might be the only piece of Aquaman media I've ever seen where it feels like the people making it actually genuinely like Aquaman. Aquaman King of Atlantis is the best of the miniseries turned movies, although it's also the one that feels the least like one cohesive story, partially because while all of the others were like 10 to 12 episodes of like maybe 5 minutes each, this one was 3 episodes of 45 minutes each, which also makes it the longest movie on this list. Despite that, it also has the most tightly constructed narrative and also easily the most distinct visual style. I might be dating myself, but the animation of this movie reminds me really strongly of The Marvelous Adventures of Flapjack, like so strongly that I actually looked it up to see if they were made by the same studio. That style did start to bug me a little, like after a while it starts to feel like every single movement a character makes has to be quirked out in some way, but it also has some of the best jokes in any of these movies, including Mira not believing in outer space.
Outer space is real.
Right, there's less water, but more floating.
What? No.
And the Atlanteans being weirded out by Arthur wanting to actually sit on his throne.
Atlanteans don't actually sit on their chairs. You're supposed to float an inch above them.
Hey, he's letting his butt touch the throne.
Not to mention this entire scene of Arthur talking to fish is absolute gold.
Huh? Really? Wow, that's crazy.
What's crazy?
Nothing. I'm having trouble getting out of this conversation.
Ooh, what about this guy? Ask this guy.
That's a tuna. You're basically asking me to talk to a cow.
Also, yes, that is Jillian Jacobs, and she's awesome. Now this is going to be a controversial decision. I know that Wonder Woman Bloodlines has its haters, and I'm not even saying that it's totally uncalled for. It does have a really weak middle act and lacks a strong central antagonist until literally the post-credits scene. However, I will stand 10 toes down and argue that this movie gets Wonder Woman in a way that no Wonder Woman movie ever has. Bloodlines is kind of a rehash of the origin story we see in every Wonder Woman movie. Side note, please, someone make a Wonder Woman movie that isn't just an origin story. Except that after leaving Themyscira, she lives for years with antiquities expert Dr. Julia Capitelli and her daughter Vanessa, and the rest of the movie essentially plays out as a family drama in which Vanessa becomes more and more resentful of how much of her mother's attention goes to Diana rather than her. And anchoring this movie in Diana's love for her surrogate sister and desire to protect her no matter what is so emblematic of what Wonder Woman is all about. Bloodlines successfully reconciles the warrior-woman dichotomy that the 2009 Wonder Woman was grappling with, giving us a Diana who leads with compassion and grace but isn't afraid to beat somebody's ass if she needs to. When she gives her speech to Vanessa in the third act, I feel legitimate chills.
That you're not enough for those who loved you. I felt that fear too. But I knew my purpose in this life, and if it is at all in my power, you will survive long enough to learn yours.
Not only that, but Diana blinding herself with snake venom so that she can fight Medusa without turning to stone is one of the most metal things I have ever seen. We want to talk about the real punk rock? Wonder Woman Bloodlines, they could never make me hate you.
Teen Titans Go! To the movies!
So I will admit that I was one of those 90s kids who had a chip on my shoulder about Teen Titans Go.
You ruined my childhood!
However, maturity is being willing to admit that you were wrong, and I can admit that Teen Titans Go is a very clever and very self-aware film. It does a really good job of satirizing like the superhero film industrial complex, including some very much appreciated jabs at the Snyderverse.
What's your mother's name? Martha. My mommy's name is Martha too. Wait. What's your father's name?
Jonathan?
Mine's Thomas.
The central premise of this movie is that the Titans are frustrated that they are the only superheroes who have yet to get a movie, which, you know, is not true, but it is true that they've never been on the big screen. It's just a little weird to me that they depict the Titans as like these D-listers who nobody really cares about, when in reality they are just as popular, if not more so, than the Justice League. Also, some of the jokes are admittedly not necessarily to my taste. I do think that some of them overstay their welcome. However, I do understand that this movie is ultimately for kids, and I can't not appreciate the way this movie just swings for the fences at every opportunity. Like, baby Kal-El shakes ass in this movie. Will Arnett voices Deathstroke, who disguises himself as Kristen Bell. Robin all but murders Batman's parents. Also, it is a bit of a musical, and the opening number, it slaps. It does.
The star, the fire, the live, the wire, the alien princess in my alien attire. Teen Titans, the Titans, the Teen Titans, Teen Titans, the Titans, the Teen Titans.
I don't want it to. I hate to admit it, but it does. It slaps.
Bruce.
I have a lot of thoughts on The Dark Knight Returns, not all of them fully coherent. However, the thing that I appreciate about Part 2 is the way it commits itself to making Bruce more of a heroic figure, whereas Part 1 is more about making him this rebellious, gritty outlaw. We actually get to see more of him inspiring people in a positive way, which I really like, although I don't love hearing him say things like, "I am the law." Also, as cool as the Batman and Superman fight is, we do have to acknowledge that it is to blame for Batman v Superman. My top complaint about Batman Year One is that it's too short. This origin story clocks in at just barely over an hour, and I do feel like the ending would be more satisfying if it had like even just an extra 10 minutes. I say this is an origin story, but it's really more of a Jim Gordon origin story than a Batman one. Basically, Jim Gordon gets transferred to the Gotham PD after being ostracized by his former precinct for ratting on a fellow cop, and this happens at the same time that Bruce Wayne finally moves back to Gotham with the intent to finally start his crusade against Gotham's corruption. I don't see this talked about too often, but I appreciate the way this film approaches gender. This Gotham is run by a kind of violent masculinity, and both Bruce and Gordon have to learn to speak that language in order to integrate themselves enough to actually make a difference. But don't worry, if seeing Jim Gordon stand by and watch a kid being beaten up by a cop disturbs you, he later takes that same cop out into the woods, beats him to within an inch of his life, and leaves him lying naked in the snow. Bryan Cranston is also incredible as Gordon. I could take or leave Ben McKenzie as Batman. I like Eliza Dushku as Catwoman, too bad her storyline is cut very short. If we had those extra 10 minutes, I would probably use them on her. I I like to refer to this movie as Superman versus the Death Penalty. It's a very thoughtful movie that's a lot more interested in like moral inquiry than action movie antics, and in that way is kind of like a spiritual predecessor to James Gunn's Superman. It has that same hope core vibe to it, that determination to believe in good, even when the world seems determined to prove you wrong, that insistence that optimism is not always the same as naivete. The ending is perhaps a little bit convenient, but it's worth it for just how strong the ending lands. So I don't want to itemize too much, I want to review these movies holistically, but I would be remiss to bring up this movie and not mention this line.
There is a difference between you and me. We both looked into the abyss, but when it looked back at us, you blinked.
Every time I watch that scene, the feeling that wells up in me is what I can only imagine is experienced by like football fans or spectators at a Roman gladiator match. I honestly don't have that much to say about this movie. It's just so clean and tight and well made. I don't necessarily love all of the casting decisions. I don't really like William Baldwin as Batman, but I do love Martian Manhunter's storyline. And I also like Wonder Woman finally getting her invisible jet by stealing it from the crime syndicate. Quality cinema. We haven't gotten to it yet, but Batman vs. Two-Face is the sequel to Batman Return of the Caped Crusaders, an animated film based on the 1966 Batman TV show and featuring most of that show's original cast, or at least the ones who are still alive. And in this case, even more, because this movie actually came out 4 months after Adam West passed away. I obviously like Return of the Caped Crusaders more, and we'll get into why when we get to that movie, but I still think this is such a great send-up to like classic superhero television. It's campy, it's fun, but the characters are all taking it seriously, which just makes the whole thing better. It also features William Shatner as Two-Face, making it kind of a who's who of 1960s cult television. But there's also this like bittersweet warmth underpinning the fact that this is Adam West's final performance as Batman, and that makes it a really unexpectedly moving experience as well.
To the mutants! Ain't you got the stomach for it?
So I understand that Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns is like the sacred calf of Batman comics, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have mixed feelings about it. It's very well constructed, and I can appreciate the way that it brings this darker, more gritty realism to the DC world, but I also wonder if it goes a little bit too far in that, but also, is that the point? The Dark Knight Returns sees an older Bruce Wayne take up the mantle of Batman again after seeing the way that the city has deteriorated in his absence. He's older, he's much more embittered, and most importantly, he is more violent. And while I can appreciate that violence is just naturally a part of superhero storytelling, The Dark Knight Returns takes it to a place that I'm not sure that I'm totally comfortable with. Again, that is part of the point. Like, yes, the system is corrupt, cops are incompetent, and the city is broken beyond recognition, so a certain level of brutality is required. But I also can't act like it's not disconcerting to me to watch Batman brutally beating up a criminal who has already been subdued while a cop stands by and encourages him. I'm also not going to pretend like it doesn't bother me that every character who voices any disagreement with what Batman is doing is framed as either completely out of touch or totally naive.
We have to strive to reintegrate the disenfranchised into society, not revel in their punishment. Excuse me? No, I'd never live in the city.
But then I have to question if that too is the point. Like, are we supposed to think that he's going too far? And it's probably a credit to how well written the story is that they never really give us a satisfying answer, just more questions. Like, the fact that I am still grappling with what The Dark Knight Returns means to me as a Batman fan was probably to some extent the goal.
Mother of God.
You're about to realize that a lot of the movies that cracked the top tiers are just movies that made me cry. Justice Society World War II is the second film in the Tomorrowverse in which Barry Allen travels back in time to, you guessed where, and meets the Justice Society, who the President of America has recruited to help fight the Nazis. It's a little bit aimless in the same way that Justice League Dark or Wonder Woman Bloodlines are, in the sense that it doesn't really have the strongest second act. However, it makes up for that with just really sweet character work. There's this whole thing where Steve Trevor proposes to Wonder Woman every day, and every day she turns him down, but he keeps doing it because she promised that eventually she would say yes, and he likes that at least once a day he gets to make her smile.
You are just so beautiful when you're about to kick some Nazi tail.
The twist in the middle is cool, but not altogether necessary. This is just a moving story about living for a future that you're not sure that you'll get to see and making the most of today, and as I said, the ending makes me cry. Justice League Doom has such Saturday morning cartoon vibes to me, partially because it has the same voice cast as the original Justice League animated series, just subbing out Phil LaMarr for Nathan Fillion as Hal Jordan, but also because it feels less like a movie and more like an extended episode of a TV show. For some, that could be a flaw, but for me, it brings a rather nostalgic vibe to the whole thing. Like, this is the type of movie that would be nearly impossible for somebody who is not already a DC fan to get into, because it really doesn't stop at any point to explain the characters or the relationships. It just expects you to already know what it's on about, but that's also kind of what DC animated movies are all about. Like, these movies are not made to bring in new fans, they're made to appeal to existing fans, and Justice League Doom does that spectacularly well by taking these archetypal, almost platonic versions of these characters and just putting their hands to the fire. There's a sense of momentum to it, a sense of gravity to everything that happens in this movie. And even though some of Batman's plans to take down the Justice League are a little silly, I can't deny that I also get chills every time I watch the "we're under attack" scene. At last, we have come to our final tier. However, before we jump into it, I have some honorable mentions I would like to share with you. But Luke, you said this was a comprehensive list. You said this was every DC animated movie ever made. How could there possibly be honorable mentions? Well, let me just explain.
Happy Halloween, Scooby-Doo.
Whoa! Why that escalated fast?
So this is my first honorable mention, and my main problem with it is that I can't tell if it's a DC movie or not. Technically it is. DC Entertainment was one of the co-producers. However, the only reason Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo ended up on my radar at all is because Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow, is in it, and he's the only DC character in it. They do explicitly state that it is the same Jonathan Crane who used to work at Gotham University and has recently escaped from Arkham Asylum, so that should be enough to qualify this as a DC movie, right? Well, there's a scene later in the movie where Bill Nye is talking to a group of trick-or-treaters. Bill Nye is in this movie, by the way. One of the kids is dressed up as Aquaman, and he ends up lecturing him on what the physiological and sociological implications would be if Aquaman were real. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow, is real, and Arkham Asylum is real, I assume that Batman would be real, so I would assume that Aquaman would be real. So does this take place in the DC universe or not? Now, it's worth pointing out that this movie is directed by Maxwell Adams, the mastermind / madman behind the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, so it is entirely possible, nay likely, that this is being done to confuse me on purpose. And there is still an argument for including this movie because, like I said, DC Entertainment is at least one of the co-producers. However, my other reason for not wanting to rank it is that it would rank pretty high because it slaps. And if I were the one clicking on this video, I would be pretty pissed if a Scooby-Doo movie in which the Scarecrow is the only DC character wound up in the top 2 tiers. So I think it's just best if we don't. So this one is a DC movie, there is no denying it. It is very clearly a DC movie. My problem with ranking it is just that I can't understand it. As far as I have been able to learn, Eagle Talon is an anime that is pretty popular in Japan but never really made its way outside of the country, and it follows a group of comically inept supervillains who try and fail repeatedly to take over the world. In this movie, they end up meeting the Justice League, who are in Japan to track down Joker, Harley, and Penguin, who are there to do, evil things. And the problem that the Justice League ends up running into is that the Eagle Talon universe is too low budget to sustain the high-powered CGI superheroics that they are used to, causing them to revert to these horrific little South Park creatures every time the production budget bottoms out. Now, not only is that hilarious, it is also one of the most inventive critiques I have ever seen of modern superhero cinema, and would easily rank this movie in the top tier. However, as I said, I cannot understand all of it. To my knowledge, no English dub of this movie exists, and while I am not a stranger to watching anime with subs, the only subtitled version that I could find had auto-generated subtitles, which were at times incomprehensible. I still watched the whole thing because I'm fucking dedicated, and while I am confident that I got the broad strokes of the story, I am also certain that there were things that I missed. So while the things that I did understand were genius and would genuinely put this movie among the best, enough of it remains a mystery to me that I just don't feel like I can rank it. Like, I think that this movie makes a really insightful critique on the responsibility of those with extreme wealth to put it towards good causes, but I can't be sure of that. I want to be so clear, though, that I scoured the internet looking for a way to watch this movie properly. I even considered dropping $40 on the DVD box set, only to discover that it also does not have English subtitles. I could not even find a plot summary of this movie to help me fill in the gaps. That's how obscure it is. It's brilliant, though. I heavily recommend it to anybody who, speaks Japanese or doesn't mind being a little bit confused. And without further ado, we have at last arrived at the top tier. Holy peak, Batman. This tier title is a little bit of a joke with myself because while I have inferred a couple of times now that I think Batman media is oversaturated, and I do, a good chunk of my top tier are also Batman movies. It's not my fault, okay? It's not my fault that there are so many Batman movies. There's a reason he's popular. It's because when Batman media hits, it really hits. Best of the Tomorrowverse, and it's only part 1. Batman The Long Halloween is one of the truest Batman mysteries that we have, and if you've seen Matt Reeves' The Batman, you'll be familiar with the plot. That movie is essentially part Long Halloween, part Year One, and like a skosh of Batman Hush. Also probably like Chemical X. The basic plot is that a serial killer shows up in Gotham and starts offing members of the mob, creating tensions between Gotham's two rival crime families, and just for style points, they only kill on holidays. This is, in my opinion, one of the strongest overarching narratives that DC has ever put on screen, at least in their animated media. The only reason part 1 ranks lower is because most of it is kind of just set up for part 2. If I have a complaint, it's that Bruce and Selina's relationship feels kind of undercooked. Like, for example, I spent the entire movie thinking that they didn't know each other's secret identities, only for her to call him Bruce towards the end of the movie. Like, when did she learn that? Also, it suffers from some of the same stylistic and budgetary constraints of the Tomorrowverse as a whole. For example, and I didn't really notice this until my most recent rewatches, a lot of the Tomorrowverse movies weirdly lack incidental music. Like, there's an entire fight scene in Superman Man of Tomorrow that just has no scoring, which I imagine is a cost-saving measure, considering I'm sure they spent a lot of their budget on celebrity voice actors. Now, that kind of works for The Long Halloween, because those moments of silence actually work to really heighten the tension, but there are a couple of moments that I wish could have had a little bit more cinematic flair.
Titans, go!
I cannot express to you how little I expected to like this movie as much as I did. Like, why am I getting emotional at Raven eating a bunch of alternate universe versions of herself like Pac-Man to absorb their powers? Why does that have genuine emotional resonance? What is happening? Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, as the title would suggest, features the Go versions of the characters being pitted against the 2003 versions in like a Coliseum-style battle that ends up being a setup by Trigon to try to steal Raven's powers. And let me just say, I am instantly amused by the difference between the two versions of Trigon. Like, why does this one look like your standard PTA dad? Like, why does he look like the kind of dad that Raven would ask to drop her off like a block away from her friend's house? But I also find the inherent unseriousness of the Go versions of the characters less annoying in this movie, because not only are they self-aware about it, but there's actually like a direction to the story which gives the emotional beats the time that they need to breathe. And it also makes the comedy funnier. Like, I don't watch Teen Titans Go like that, so I was actually unaware of the fact that apparently Santa Claus is a recurring villain in that show who also happens to have multiversal travel capabilities. Like, that's delightful. What do you mean? The only thing that does kind of take me out of it is the fact that the 03 versions of the characters are positioned as like the grim, serious versions, which, like, okay, I guess in relation to the Go versions of the characters, sure. But if you actually look at like the larger spectrum of superhero television, the 2003 Teen Titans is still on the sillier end of the spectrum, especially compared to the other superhero shows of its time. However, then they meet the DC AMU versions of the characters and are like, oh no, those are the serious Titans, which is both hilarious and true. Dark Knight meets Home Alone. This is another movie that I did not predict liking as much as I do. Clearly, I am a poor predictor of my own taste. Merry Little Batman features Damian trying to prove to his dad that he's ready to be a superhero while unintentionally leaving a trail of wreckage in his wake. This movie is actually the exception to my rule about defanging Damian, because not only is he so sweet and endearing that I don't even care that he's not murderous, but there's also an in-universe explanation for it. You see, this movie operates under a what-if scenario of what if Bruce actually got to raise Damian as a baby instead of the League of Assassins, and the result is that they have the cutest relationship. This version of Batman, who is voiced by Luke Wilson, by the way, is just like a doting single dad who's obsessed with his son, and I love that, and I was worried that I wouldn't. I was actually worried that this emotionally open and vulnerable version of Bruce would be too far a cry from the character that we know to really read as Bruce Wayne, but they managed to tie his parenting style back to his trauma in such a clear and emotionally resonant way that just feels like a gut punch when you get to that moment. Also, I love that even with a healthy upbringing and total lack of ill intent, Damian Wayne is still just a human wrecking ball. I will admit that the animation is a little bit off-putting. I actually put off watching this movie for like at least a year because I caught a glimpse of Alfred in it and found him absolutely horrifying. But after watching the movie, I find I don't even care. I just love this movie. It's adorable, and I'm probably gonna watch it every Christmas now.
Sub-Zero.
Fantastic villain, check. Feminism, check. Sub-Zero follows Victor Freeze's attempts to save his wife after her cryopod is damaged in some kind of mining accident, and he discovers that the only way to save her is with an organ transplant, and the only person he can find with her incredibly rare blood type is Barbara Gordon. Now, this easily could have turned into a damsel in distress, like Princess Peach type story, and I suppose on paper it is, but they managed to sidestep that first by having Barbara go with him willingly so that Freeze won't hurt any civilians, but second by taking every opportunity to emphasize her competence. Like, half the movie is spent watching her try to escape, and she puts up a hell of a fight. Like, look at my girl go. But Freeze is also incredibly sympathetic here, even though he is planning on draining Barbara dry and is pretty unrepentant about that. But he's just a guy who loves his wife, you know, like, dare I say, the original wife guy. Also, yes, the ending makes me cry. I more or less said my piece on The Long Halloween when talking about part 1, so for part 2, I will just say the reveal of the holiday killer will stay with me for quite some time, as will this scene of Harvey Dent talking to himself in his hospital room as Two-Face is born. My elevator pitch anytime I recommend Return of the Caped Crusaders to anyone is there is a scene in which Batman reprimands Robin for trying to jaywalk.
Quickly, Robin, to the crosswalk.
And that, in and of itself, encapsulates everything about why I think this movie is brilliant. I might be the only person on the planet who likes Return of the Caped Crusaders for the specific reasons that I do, but as an avid fan of the Scream franchise, I love anything that satirizes a genre while still managing to pay homage to it, and that is exactly what this movie does. It takes all of the inherent campiness of the 1966 TV show and dials it up to 11. Batman and Robin fight each other with ridiculously specific gadgets. Robin gets him and Catwoman out of a jam by spraying them with bat anti-isotope spray that he just so happened to have on hand. But best of all, the central conflict of this movie sees Batman slowly turning evil after being exposed to Catwoman's bat nip, and a lot of his behavior just starts to mirror the modern Batman. There's this brilliant scene where he's talking to Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara, and he just does the disappearing bit that he's now famous for, and they're just baffled because he's never left without saying goodbye before.
Very dramatic indeed, and not like Batman at all.
It's genius. I could write an entire essay on how this movie serves as a postmodern meta-commentary on the cultural evolution of Batman as a media icon. And I'm an Aquarius, so anything that hits the intellectual centers of my brain hard enough for me to utter the words I could write an essay is getting high marks from me. Not only that, but it's just this great balance of goofy and clever. They even make these tongue-in-cheek nods to the old Batman-Robin gay rumors that allegedly led them to add Aunt Harriet into the show.
And I was beginning to think you kept me around only for appearances.
Appearances, Aunt Harriet?
Have I convinced you yet? This movie is gold.
War's over. Everybody lost.
Ah, yes, where it all began. Not like DC animation as a whole, like the DC AMU. But even that's kind of a catch-22 because this movie technically doesn't take place in the main DC AMU. It kind of creates the universe because you see... The Flashpoint Paradox sees the fallout of the Flash going back in time to save his mother, who was murdered when he was a child, and if you've watched the Flash TV show, that should sound familiar to you. However, if your only familiarity with Flashpoint is through the CW storyline, baby, buckle up, because this is a horror movie. Barry accidentally messes with the timeline, creating a world where Bruce was the one who died in that alley when he was a child, and his father became Batman. Superman was locked up in government containment after his pod crash-landed in Metropolis and leveled half the city, and Themyscira is at war with Atlantis after Wonder Woman killed Mira, who tried to kill her for sleeping with Aquaman. If all of that sounds grim, it is. It's some of the bleakest stuff that DC has ever put on screen. But what stops it from being such an oppressive bummer like Apocalypse War is the fact that none of it is permanent. This is essentially a through the looking glass type story where Barry, and by extent the viewer, is forced to see all of these heroes that we love perverted into things that are unrecognizable. And it all serves as this commentary on learning to let go of the past, as evidenced by the prayer that Barry's mom tells him that her mom told her, which weirdly enough is the Serenity Prayer used in AA, Barry's grandmother, I have you clocked. It's well paced, it's well acted, it's at times horrifying, and with a genuinely uplifting ending that, yes, made me cry. Now, you know we're really approaching the peak when Paul Dini and Bruce Timm's names are on the bill. As I was compiling this list, I noticed that something that really helped elevate a movie for me a lot of the time was originality. Like, a lot of my top tier movies are original stories that actually add to their characters' lore rather than just adapting things from the comics. And while Terry McGinnis never quite reached the same level of fame as the DCAU's other original creation, Batman Beyond remains one of Bruce Timm and Paul Dini's most underrated creations. Return of the Joker focuses on Bruce starting to push Terry away, as it seems like the Joker, who he long believed was dead, has somehow risen from the grave. This is one of the few films to really dig into the dangers of being a superhero, and particularly being a young superhero. The flashback to the night Joker dies and what happens to Tim Drake is so genuinely disturbing. And I was a little worried that I was only ranking this movie this high because of that sequence, but then I remembered that Terry basically defeats the Joker by heckling him.
The reason you kept coming back was you never got a laugh out of the old man. Show yourself! You make me laugh. But only because I think you're kind of pathetic.
Being chronologically the last film in the DCAU, this whole thing feels like a send-up to the entire DCAU Batman empire, complete with Harley even getting her own little shout-out at the end, and really shows just how special Batman Beyond and the DCAU as a whole is.
The city needs me.
I cry every single time I watched The Death of Superman. I'm a big sap when it comes to Superman. You may know that if you've seen my Clark Kent video. And there's something about the sentimentality of this movie that just cuts through a lot of the grim self-seriousness of the DCAMU. Like, it's the way that Clark admits that he likes the name Superman, not because it makes him sound tough or powerful, but because Lois gave it to him. It's the way that Barry emphasizes how you have to be open with the people you love, even as a superhero. It's the way the entire world watches in naked horror as Superman puts it all on the line to protect them. The simultaneously personal heartbreak of Lois having to watch him die, alongside the global heartbreak of all these people he's never met but has nonetheless impacted. And existing within a shared universe allows that heartbreak to go out even further because it allows it to extend to the League. Batman watching him die? Where are the tissues? The Death of Superman has been adapted ad nauseum, but this is one of the only versions that really manages to make his death feel not just like a symbolic, but a deeply personal loss. But don't worry, if it's classic superhero action you're looking for, Doomsday does spend a solid quarter of the movie dog-walking the Justice League, including an incredibly badass fight with Wonder Woman.
A soaring new adventure. Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, the animated movie.
Now this is where it all began. Batman Mask of the Phantasm was not technically the first DC animated movie, but it was the first feature-length film. It's one of only like 4 to have gotten a full theatrical release, and it was the first to show that DC could really thrive in the medium. Mask of the Phantasm takes some of its narrative cues from Year One, showcasing an early career Bruce Wayne trying and stumbling in his attempts to become Batman, but instead of any of the stuff with Jim Gordon, it anchors the story in Bruce's romance with Andrea Beaumont, voiced by the GOAT Dana Delaney. And damn it, if this doesn't feel like an old school Hollywood tragic romance. There's echoes of Casablanca and Citizen Kane, particularly in the way that their romance is told primarily through flashbacks to the point where they don't even meet again in the present day until like halfway through the movie. Seeing Bruce beg at his parents' graves for them to release him from his vow because when he set out on his crusade, he never counted on being happy is moving enough. But then seeing him don the cowl for the first time and just seeing Alfred stare at him in shock is just almost earth-shattering. The idea that being Batman is a compulsion, an obsession, even a sickness for Bruce is fairly commonplace in modern-day Batman media, to the point where I'd almost argue it's kind of like the default reading of the character. But at the time, very few would have thought of Bruce's first donning of the cowl as a tragic moment the way it's depicted here. Now, Is Andrea a little bit of a manic pixie dream girl? Yeah. But she's also voiced by Dana Delaney, so I'm having too much fun to care. Also, remember what I said about newer DC animated movies lacking the visual flair and cinematic quality of the older ones? This is the gold standard. The lush visuals, the sweeping score. This is a movie that understands that it is a movie, and it really leans into that grandiosity.
Oh my goodness. I am so sorry.
Now, if we want to talk about movies that I was not expecting to like, nothing could have prepared me for the feeling that I had walking out of the Lego movie in 2014. So when the Lego Batman movie was announced, I knew that it was going to be good. And do you know how weird that is? Do you know how weird of a feeling it is to look at a movie called the Lego Batman movie and go, yeah, that's gonna slap in a deeply humanist way. I love that this movie is not afraid of its own sentimentality. Like, this is unabashedly a found family narrative. And it works so well by grounding itself in this nuanced satirization of Batman. Like, Will Arnett's Batman is at once totally flanderized and also a thoughtful meditation on the character. And I love all of the little references to past Batman media. Like, you can really feel the love for the character baked into this movie, even when they're unabashedly making fun of him. It's also hilarious. Michael Cera is everything as Robin, and we've really never seen like that particular version of Robin put on screen before, at least not for a long time. Like that like just bright-eyed ball of sunshine that really harkens back to the original days of the Batman and Robin comics. The Lego Batman movie is just expertly constructed. It's visually mesmerizing. It's the funniest movie on this list, bar none, and it's just an all-around delight. So remember when I said I really liked the Red Hood storyline? This movie is everything to me. It was one of the first films that I watched back in quarantine when I was really getting into DC animated movies, and it just blew my mind that something like this existed for over a decade without my knowledge. Under the Red Hood is a character study of Bruce Wayne's worst mistake, the Robin that time forgot. Jason Todd. And while I won't go so far as to say that this movie creates a compelling mystery, anyone who's really paying attention can probably guess who the Red Hood is. What it does do is spin this tightly wound, deeply personal tale of loss and guilt and vengeance. The final confrontation between Bruce, Jason, and the Joker is one of the tightest scenes in DC history. And the fact that Jason orchestrated all of this just in the hopes of getting Bruce to kill the Joker because that would prove to Jason that Bruce cared about him, this is Ibsen, this is Shakespeare, this is Greek tragedy. And on top of that, it has an amazing voice cast. Jensen Ackles is amazing as Jason, John DiMaggio is one of the all-time great Jokers, Jason Isaacs voices Ra's al Ghul, and who voices Batman but Bruce Greenwood, who, while he hasn't voiced the character all that many times, did voice him in Young Justice. I love the scene with Ra's al Ghul where he admits that he feels guilty about what happened to Jason. I love the confrontation between Jason and Joker on the bridge. I could talk for an hour about all of the scenes that I love in this movie, but at the end of the day, what works so well about the entire whole is that everything that happens is so personal. And the fact that it all culminates in this heartbreaking flashback to Jason's first night out as Robin, just so excited and having no idea of where this new chapter in his life is going to end up taking him. Oh my God, I was speechless the first time I finished this movie. I just sat there knowing that that final scene was going to stay with me and that I was probably going to come back to this movie. And I have. I've rewatched this movie more often than any other. In fact, on my birthday a couple of years ago, all I did was get a bunch of my friends together and force them to watch Under the Red Hood with me. It's tense, it's brilliant, it's heartbreaking, it's peak. It is the best animated movie DC has ever made. And that is every DC animated movie ranked. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave it a like. It took so fucking long to make this. Between watching all of the movies, making the list, recording, and editing, it is not an exaggeration to say that I have spent almost half of my 2025 doing this. But it was definitely a labor of love because DC animation is truly one of my favorite things in this world. I really do think that there is something just so special about it. I was actually going to say something here about the future of DC animated movies being uncertain, what with James Gunn kind of trying to streamline things, but apparently we're getting Batman Nightfall next year, although more recent plot developments may have even put that into question. But I really do hope that they keep making these. I think that they are such a great avenue for just creative experimentation. Please let me know in the comments how you felt about some of these rankings. How would you rank them? What's your favorite DC animated movie? I'm sure your opinions are going to differ from mine somewhat or a lot because, you know, if there's one thing that comic book fandoms are well known for, it's consensus. I don't really have anything else to say, so I guess I'll just leave you on this note. Renew Young Justice or give them a movie.